Alright, welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm really excited for today's video, and if you clicked on the video, you likely know why. Because today we're talking about Conformity Gate. Now, if you click on this video, you probably already know what Conformity Gate is, so I'm not going to go over that. But if you don't know what it is, then make sure to just do some Googling before you go into this video so you actually understand what is going on in the world, because it's pretty crazy and it's very interesting. I've been thinking about it a ton. So earlier this week on Tuesday or Monday, there was these rumors spreading around about the series Stranger Things, and everyone was pretty upset about how the series ended. They weren't very fulfilled with the ending of the series, and everyone kind of started looking for clues, like, is there going to be more? I want there to be more. And so people started looking at the episodes and finding all of these loopholes and these clues, and so out of nowhere, seemingly, this rumor about another episode started to come out, and people were saying, like, oh, the people in the crowd are sitting like this, and that looks like Vecna, and so maybe Vecna created this mass illusion at some point in the episode, and everything that we just watched was fake. And I'm not gonna lie, I really liked that theory. And one of the reasons that I liked that theory was because I myself, I've been watching Stranger Things ever since it came out. I watched the first season when it came out, and I've been watching ever since. And when I watched the finale of Stranger Things, I was like, okay, I'm pretty satisfied with this, but I'm not gonna lie, there was this thing that I felt where I was just like, this just doesn't seem right. This doesn't feel like the Duffer Brothers. And so I had kind of latched on to these theories because I was like, man, if they would have ended it like that, like, wow, that would have been masterful. That would have been genius. And if they have this new episode coming out, then it might actually end like that. So I was actually pretty excited and hopeful that another episode was going to come out. And, I actually, on Tuesday, I checked at 7 o'clock. I was like, oh, no episode. I checked at 8 o'clock. Oh, man, no episode. So I was pretty disappointed, and a lot of other people were too. But this thing that has happened is so crazy, because here's a couple of different ways the finale could have went. Everyone could have just watched the finale and been like, oh, they kind of could have either been happy with it, content with it, or really disappointed, and then they could have just moved on. They could have just moved on. But that didn't happen. What happened was people responded, and they decided that they were just so unsatisfied with the ending of the show, and they literally started watching episodes, and they started looking for clues, and they started doing this whole thing where I think in a lot of ways they were coping with something like grief. When someone passes away, for example, one of the stages of grief can be to come up with a story or a narrative about what happened so that we can actually cope with what happened. In a lot of the ways, this show, the end of the show, the finale of the show, was like a death. It was like a death in a lot of people's lives because, I don't know, it came out, 10 years ago? So if you started watching it all the way back then, you've been experiencing life for 10 years with this show as kind of a part of it. And so 10 years has gone by, and it's kind of like when you graduate from high school. It's like even if you didn't really enjoy school, even if you weren't really interested in school, like at the end you sort of felt this like sadness that phase of your life is over. And so I think largely that's what happened with the season finale of Stranger Things, is a lot of people felt this grief that a phase of their life was over. And that can be really hard to come to grips with. And so what people do usually in that situation is they'll try to figure out, like, how can I deal with this emotion? And one of the ways people deal with emotions is to tell themselves a story. You know, you might blame it, like if someone dies, we typically know, like, it's very common for people to blame themselves for that person's death. Because that might be much easier to manage, actually, than blaming the outside world. Because we actually have control over ourselves. You know, we have an influence and willpower over ourselves, but we can't control the external world. So when we blame ourselves for a death, you know, that can actually be a helpful mechanism, because it gives us the power back to decide. It gives us the power to decide. And what's really, really interesting is that in order to decide, we first have to tell ourselves a story. We have to make up a story. And that's exactly what people did with Stranger Things, is they made up this story. And I don't know, maybe an episode will come out. I don't know. Like, I don't know the answers. I don't know what the Duffer Brothers are doing. You know, I can't say anything for sure. I'm not necessarily clinging to that idea, but it would be cool if they did it. I think it'd be masterful if they did it, and it would be this massive twist that I think we all kind of want out of Stranger Things. Because it's so twisted, even the core premise of the show is so twisted. The Upside Down, Vecna, the Demogorgons, all of it's so otherworldly. And the end of it wasn't really otherworldly at all. In fact, it was really worldly. Like, they just all moved on with their lives. And even more interesting is the irony of the ending of the show. At the end of the show, Mike Wheeler, one of the main characters, they're in his basement and they're playing this game of Dungeons and Dragons. You all know what Dungeons and Dragons is. It's a narrative-based game where you play as characters and you essentially come up with this campaign or this story. And they're getting to the end of the game, and one of the other characters, Max, was like, Mike, aren't you this master storyteller? Like, really? Like, the ending of this game is going to be happiness and comfort? Like, how trite, she said. And it's almost like the fundamental criticism of the ending of the show. Because we're all like, seriously? A happy ending? A comfortable ending to all of this madness? How trite. So Max is literally the avatar of all of these people who are responding to the ending being happy. And everyone kind of going off in the direction that they were supposed to in the first place, besides Elle. But even Elle, you could argue that she was never really meant to be in Hawkins. You know, that she might have too much there, that it was just right for her to go off and experience the world in a new way. And so there is this irony of the Mike Wheeler scene at the end, because Max is like all of us who are unfulfilled with the ending. And what does Mike do? What does Mike do? Mike is in this place of grief. We're all in a place of grief. Mike is in this place of grief because he just left Elle, or he just lost Elle. And so in order to cope with her loss, he's got to find a new way forward. So how does he do that? Well, he's extremely superstitious because the disappearance of Elle is very peculiar. Gosh, it's very peculiar. Why is it peculiar? Because she has superpowers. She is so powerful that she and her sister Kali can literally make an illusion. She can make people see things that aren't really there, and she can also make people not see things that are actually there. Okay? So what does Mike do? Mike comes up with this conspiracy theory that he doesn't know is true. Okay? You know, likely it is true because we saw her at the end, but Mike doesn't know it's true. All he knows is that he doesn't understand why Elle wasn't impacted by the sonic boom machine that usually prevents her from using her powers. He also doesn't know why there's a speaker at the graduation ceremony that's kind of making this weird noise that sounds like Elle could be interfering with the sound machine. And there's all these open questions, these clues that Mike sees, and what does he do with those? He draws a conclusion. He comes up with a theory. He comes up with a story. And that's literally what he does at the end, is he tells this story about the mage and how her and her sister conducted this plan, and they executed this plan that would trick all of them, that would trick all of the main characters into believing that she was really dead. So they came up with this plan, and all the clues that Mike was identifying were leading to, okay, this plan was successful. And so the story he tells himself to be able to cope with losing her is that she's okay. That she's fine. That she's off in a distant land. We just don't know where she is. But she's off, she's alive, she's okay. And so he comes up with this theory, and he tells himself this story, and that's how he moves forward into life. Okay, so I think we can all kind of see that and understand that now. So, the last piece of this video that I really want to touch on is the power of storytelling. Oh, gosh, the sun is hot today. Oh, hey there. I just wanted to say, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel and you're enjoying the content, how do those two things like really add up? I don't think they do. I think that if you're enjoying the content, you should subscribe down below, like the video, so it forces the algorithm to show more people, and then comment down below. Let me know what you're thinking about the video and what your reaction is, because I want to hear what you have to say. And the reason that I want to touch on the power of storytelling is because it's so important to understand how to use storytelling in our own life so that we can deal with hard things like grief, or so that we can create change in our life that would usually be really hard, but the power of storytelling can actually make it a lot easier. So, the thing is that we all have our own unique experience in life. We all have our own unique life story because we all were raised, we all had different parents, we all had different life circumstances, different environments that we were in, different friends, all these unique elements to our life. And what can happen over time is that we start to forget a lot of our life. And we start to forget a lot of our life because when hard things happen to us in the past, we learned that in order to move on from those things, that we actually just had to stuff those down and to forget about those things. Like with the Stranger Things show, a way to move on for a lot of people might have just been like, okay, I just got to forget about this. I got to just stuff it down and move on. That could have been a coping mechanism for a lot of people. And we have different coping mechanisms based on different circumstances. But in general, as a general principle, a lot of us have gone through life and we've experienced that learned behavior where we decide, okay, in order for me to get through this breakup, in order for me to get through this death of a family member, in order for me to get over this betrayal from a friend, in order for me to get through this hard time, I need to forget about it. And this can show up in a multitude of different ways. People can just distract themselves with just hanging out with their friends or, their sport that they're interested in, or they can turn to really negative things and they can start to try to drink alcohol to avoid it or do drugs to numb themselves and avoid it. So there's all these different ways that core mindset can manifest itself, but the point is that mindset is there. And so we've gone throughout our life and we've had multiple instances where we told ourselves, in order to move forward, I need to forget. And now we get to this point in our lives, wherever you're at now, and you look back on your life and you're like, man, I can't remember a lot of things that happened. And you're like, why can't I remember those things? And it's like, because you decided at that time that the best way for you to move forward was to forget. So you forgot. You forgot those things. Okay, so what does this have to do with storytelling? Well, we all have our own unique story, and we've forgotten elements of our own story. We've forgotten what makes us us, what makes us unique, what unique challenges that we went through, what unique experiences that we've had. And so there's all these holes in our story. And we just learned the power of storytelling. It can literally help us deal with something extremely hard, extremely challenging. And the beauty of storytelling is that when we get our life story right, when we plug those holes in our story, we can actually take that and transform it into something amazing, into something that we never would have thought possible. Because a lot of us are still like, we're trying to find our way. We're trying to find what we're really interested in. We're trying to find what we're passionate about. We're trying to, maybe have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship. Whatever your aim or your goal is, we're all trying our best to kind of move forward and to live our best life. But we've forgotten a lot of where we've been. And so when we're dealing with these challenges, like feeling lost and just kind of feeling like we have no direction, no real direction, and kind of feeling like, we're never really fulfilled, we never have that true fulfillment, that true joy, a lot of that is to do with all the holes in your story. So there's the past aspect of your story, right? We just went over that. You have a unique past, you have a unique history, and the reason that you are who you are today is because of that unique past and that unique history. So in order for us to figure out who we are and to almost set a baseline for who we are, we first have to understand that. We have to understand the past. And so by understanding the past, we will then understand more about us and why we are the way we are today. Now there's another element to this. It's how do we take that story and now how do we move forward with it? Because the thing is, if you try to go and you plug up all those holes, they're just going to open wide open again, because likely you have a lot of unresolved trauma and emotion that you haven't fully processed. And so when you go back and you look at your past and your history, you have all this trauma that you've been hiding from, and when you go and you expose yourself to it again, you start to feel those exact feelings. And it's really hard. It's really challenging to go through that. It's very stressful, actually. Even if it's something that happened way back, it's very challenging because those emotions still live in you. The responses to the situations that you experience still live within you. And so it's like, well, how do we deal with that? And there is actually a way to deal with that. And it's wrapped up in storytelling. I'm going to close this real quick. It's wrapped up in storytelling. So, to add another layer onto this, when we had that experience, when we had that trauma that happened in our past, let's say it happened when we were 14 years old. We had something traumatic happen when we were 14, and the event happened, right? We know that. And we also know that we had a specific response to that event happening. We had a specific emotion that we felt about that event. Okay, so that event happened, and we followed the typical coping mechanism of stuff it down, forget about it, move on. So what happened was you stuffed that emotion down, and it still resides in your body. And the reason it still resides in your body is because you didn't know how to move forward. Just making sense? You didn't know how to move forward. You didn't know how to deal with that emotion that you were feeling. And it's very reasonable that you didn't know how. You were 14 years old. You didn't have the resources and the intelligence and the ability to be able to process that emotion. You didn't have the life experience. You didn't have other things that happened in your life where you were able to carry that emotion and then neutralize it and then be able to move on. So that is essentially the framework for how you move on. Is instead of stuffing it down, you figure out, well, how can I neutralize this emotion? How can I neutralize it? And I use neutralize because emotions, they're very strong. How do we start to fizzle out this emotion? How do we start to fizzle it out so that when we think about this event in the future, that it's no longer a problem? When we think about this event now, when we think about this historic event that happened in the past, when we think about it now, how do we neutralize that? So that's kind of the framework, is you neutralize the emotion and then you come up with a story. So you take a reconciliation of what happened, of what actually happened, not just how you felt about it. Okay, so you figure out what happened with the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why. You reconcile that, And then you layer on, okay, this is how I felt about it. And then just ask yourself, like, was that a reasonable response? And most likely, you had a reasonable response to it. The problem is we were told that this is we were kind of indirectly told that this is a unreasonable response to this event. You know, maybe our parents were like, just forget about it. Okay, so they said that to us. They said just forget about it. But what is the implication there? They're saying don't feel how you feel. That's not okay. It's not okay to feel how you feel. It's unjustified. It's unreasonable to feel how you feel. So a big part of it is realizing that this is actually a reasonable response. It's very reasonable. Another part of it is realizing that even the event happening itself was reasonable. Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong, but it's reasonable that the characters and the events in this story happened. You know, it's reasonable to believe that that would have happened. You know, there's no reason not to think that that wouldn't have happened. And so that neutralizes the emotion around the event, and it neutralizes the event itself. It creates a little bit of closure around the event. So, and then deeper, we can ask ourselves, well, what were 10 good things that came out of this event? And then you can come off with 10 good things. You know, because that's the thing, is like when bad things happen to us in life, there are good things that actually come out of it. Maybe it made you stronger. You know, maybe it led you to a relationship that you wouldn't have normally had. Maybe it led you to a career that you wouldn't have pursued if that event hadn't happened. There's a lot of good that can come out of the bad. Okay, so when you start to ask yourself that question and you realize, oh, there's actually good things that come out of bad things, and then you also layer that on with, okay, it was very reasonable that this thing happened, and it's reasonable that the characters involved in the story were led to those things happening, and that was a reasonable response. And now you're like, okay, well, not only was it reasonable, but there was good things that came out of it as well. And so just by doing that alone, the emotional charge that you felt that is still stored in your body, it'll start to neutralize. It'll start to go down. So then you start to think about, okay, well, what are the implications of this? How does this impact my life? What does this say about me? What does this say about me? How can I use this thing that happened to me and use it for good? And so then you come up with a plan. You come up with a story. You come up with a redemption arc. How can I redeem myself from the challenges and struggle that this event has created for me? It's like, well, one thing you could do is you could help other people who are going through it. That's one thing you could do. And you might find that that's actually really healing, because you're kind of like healing your past wounds in a sense by healing the other wounds within other people. So that can be very healing. That's a pretty good way to move on. That's a pretty good thing to do. Or you can come up with, you know, a preparation, or I'm going to learn, you know, maybe it was a relationship problem that you had, and so in order to move forward, you're going to learn, you know, you've already learned like what really went wrong. So now you dedicate yourself to learning, okay, how can I avoid this in the future? What relationship skills might I be missing that if I had those skills, I would be able to completely avoid this thing happening in the future? Okay, so you start to tell yourself a story. It's your hero journey. It's you went through this challenge, you went through this hard time, and you didn't really complete the hero's journey, but now you're completing it. And part of the hero's journey is to like, okay, I'm going to go out and seek a mentor. I'm going to go find someone who's been through this before too, and I'm going to learn from him. I'm going to gain wisdom from him, and then I'm going to go off. I'm going to beat the challenge, and I'm going to arise victorious at the end. And so there's this story narrative that helps us move forward into the future, just like what's happening with Conformity Gate. We're all trying to figure out how to move forward from the ending of Stranger Things. And is it a reasonable response? Of course it is. Of course it is. It was a show that lasted 10 years. It was a big part, a big chunk of your life. It was a big chunk of your life, and maybe it's not even really the show as much. It's not about the show as much as it is about your life and your story. Because it feels like you're moving on now from a part of yourself. So just process that for a second. It's a very reasonable response. Because now you feel like you're moving on from one phase of your life into another. And so, but now you know what's happening. Now you know why you're responding the way that you're responding. You know that it's a reasonable reaction. And you now know that in order for you to move responsibly and efficiently and hopefully successfully into the future, that you have the option to write a different story. You have the option to write a different story. And that's the power of storytelling. Whoa! Where am I? Sorry, I just scared my dogs. I just woke up underneath my desk to tell you, hey, if you're enjoying this video and you want some more content just like it, I actually have a free Facebook group that you can go and join and engage with a bunch of people who are like you, who are interested in similar topics, and you can get more content from me if that's something you're interested in. So go down to the link in the description and you will find the Facebook group.